Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, our end of the year review. What were the most important stories locally and nationally in 2018? Vituperation increasing in political discourse. What can we expect in 2019? Stay tuned. Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by the former Majority Leader of the Maryland House of Delegates, John Hurson, newly re-elected Secretary of the Maryland Republican Party, Mark Uncapher, former Maryland Assistant Secretary for Business, Bill Askinazi, political strategist, Susan Heltemes. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. Years in which there are elections oftentimes are the most unpredictable. At the start of 2018, the biggest question which Montgomery County voters were confronted with was who would succeed retiring County Executive Isaiah Leggett after 3 terms in office. In a close primary race, County Council member Mark Elrich defeated businessman David Blair by 80 votes and set up the general election contest that Mark Uncapher dreamed of between Elrich and Republican Robin Ficker. But then something happened along the way. What was that, Mark?
Well, we had a 3-way race with Nancy Florine, but I have to say Nancy never particularly got much traction, and Mark Elrich won with the base Democratic vote.
So how bad did Nancy's involvement hurt your guy, Robin?
I think that basically the anti-vote, if there was an anti-vote to Mark Elrich, pretty much compared to prior election cycles, got split between him and Nancy. It really, at the end of the day, had very little effect on the race. You
know, John, what was interesting, and now that Mark Elrich is in office and his style is very different than Ike Leggett's, is that when he won the primary, he won with such a small majority of voters in the county.
80.
Is that going to affect?
I think it was 80.
Well, that was 80 votes. But when you think about the overall vote of voters who vote for or against a candidate, he didn't have a real mandate, or does he?
No, I think he has a mandate. I mean, let's be realistic about that primary. That Democratic primary is very competitive. Okay, you had a lot of public financing of a lot of candidates. And then you had one guy come in and spend $5 million. It was a very competitive race. And I frankly was surprised that Mark won that, given the amount of money that massed against him. But he did. And so I think it goes to show, I mean, people forget that Mark came in first in like 3 or 4 elections for county council at large. Mm-hmm. I mean, people kind of know him. And so I think he had a much stronger base than people realized.
But does that give him a mandate to as county executive to going forward?
Well, he got 64% of the vote in the general election. I think that's kind of a mandate. I mean, you know, and against, again, a lot of money being put up against him. So my attitude about Mark is he needs to be given a chance. I mean, I think there's a lot of questions about, his opinions in the past, but I'm just telling you right now, he has a chance here to prove that he can govern, and I think that he needs to do that in the next year.
So, Mark, if you look at the overall project for what the county executive can do and can't do, what are your predictions for how Mr. Elrich is going to handle things this coming term?
Well, we're going to have a number of real tests going forward. Certainly, transportation is one on which he has staked out a very strong position in support of the bus rapid transit. I think there's a public policy question as to whether or not that's the right alternative, given how decentralized jobs and homes are in Montgomery County.
We're going to talk a little bit more about that in general, but overall, what's going to happen with him as a county executive?
Okay, well, I think it's very important that he learn to work with the governor. I mean, no one's really spoken about that. You've got.
I want to diddle
Yeah.
that because as swearing in and on election night, he has thrown out the gauntlet saying, no to governor, we don't widen the beltway, you know, and he has historically not been fond of the governor, and that is going to be really detrimental to Montgomery County.
Totally agree. It's a big issue.
All right, well, we're gonna do what John suggested, which is keep an open mind, and at least until the second week of January when our first show tapes, and we can really pile on them. All right, so there was a county council race come up, and as a result of term limit legislation passed in 2016, 4 open seats appeared on the county council this year. Susan, what can we expect of this new county council? Are they just younger members, newer members of the people they replaced?
The council will be considerably less liberal with the exit of Mark Elrich. There is no one in that lane as far as the new council people. We only have one woman, which is, you know, really very sad. We have 2 Hispanics now on the council with Albornoz and Navarro. We have our first openly gay person in Evan Glass. So it's going to be interesting. I think the absence of women are going to make a difference, and there'll be a learning curve. But you know, the person coming in who has lots of experience and is already a committee chair is Gabe Albornoz, and that will help with all the new people with his vast knowledge.
So, Bill, and since you really didn't have much of a change politically, the shift, other than Susan thinks it's not going to be as liberal, which is hard to believe, was term limits a mistake?
I don't think so. I think term limits is a vital component of a healthy democracy, especially where there's a county like we have where there's a decidedly lopsided margin of Democratic voters. I think term limits allows new blood and an infusion of new ideas, especially with younger people, diverse people, et cetera, both sides of the aisle. I also think that we're fortunate there's a balance here. So you have some people who have remained, who have experience, and you've got the new people coming along. I don't think learning the procedures and the mechanisms of governing is going to be that difficult. They're all bright people. I think it's going to be more of the politics of getting along, relationships, et cetera. And let's credit Robin Ficker for the term limits initiative and also the folks who were there along the way to push this.
I think
eventually it's healthy for this.
Well, I want
to.
we got about 30 seconds left. Mark, who's going to, in your opinion, will be the rising star of the county council?
It remains to be seen, of course. You mentioned Gabe. I know him. Andrew Friesen is going to be an interesting person.
John.
I would agree with those assessments. I also think Evan Glass has a real possibility to kind of break out. I mean, he's very dedicated to what he did. It's a hard job. He came in first.
Craig Rice is term limited after this term. And I think he's going to be watching every step that Mark Elrich makes. And depending on how Mark fares, Craig Rice is going to be in the mix next time for county executive.
I think Andrew Friesen's going to be the star. I mean, he's got a combination of legislative experience, and he's also got some great ideas, and he's not afraid to voice them. So I think he's going to be a leader.
So there was another hotly contested, or at least watched race in 2018, and that was the governor's race, where incumbent Governor Larry Hogan was favored really no matter who was the Democratic nominee. But even in that race, there were some surprises, particularly in the Democratic primary. John, as we all know, progressive candidate Ben Jealous won the Democratic primary, kind of in an upset and a surprise, and he was defeated by Governor Hogan rather handily in the general election. So was it a mistake for Democrats to go to someone as progressive as Mr. Jealous, or should they have picked someone more in the moderate level like Rashern Baker?
Full disclosure, I supported Rashern Baker. So, I mean, here's what I think about what happened in that race. I think the reality is that Maryland is a centrist state. I don't think people realize that. I don't think people realize that you can't just win Montgomery and Prince George's and Baltimore City and win the governor's race. You have to appeal to the two ends of the state, the western and the eastern portion of the state, and I don't think Mr. Jealous did that, and I think that's the mistake. And I think you need to have a centrist candidate to really appeal to the full gamut. I think when you say Medicare for all, that's the wrong message. I think the right message is Maryland health care for all. how do we make it work here? How do we make things work in this state? Not, these broad progressive arguments,
You're talking
which are
about
good.
a national versus a state message.
Right, and I think we sometimes get caught up in that. We have our own issues here in the state. So I really think that's what happened.
I want to go to Mark. Mark, the turnout for the general election was extraordinarily high for a midterm election, which some attribute to the Trump effect. So is Hoganism the antidote to the Trumpism?
Oh, I think they were both sort of elected under different circumstances. Hogan was elected in response to O'Malley, and Trump, for better or for worse, was elected as a disruptor. People who didn't like the status quo that was being offered, and for both parties, and wanted a change, and that's what they're getting.
So Susan, let's, picking up on John's theme about being a centrist party, Kathleen Matthews, who was the chairman of the Democratic Party, was ousted in this past December, and Maya Rockeymoore Cummings came in as a much more progressive liberal. So is there a danger that the party is shifting too far to the left?
There is a topic that deals with this race that no one has talked about, and that is the Montgomery County versus the Baltimore City rivalry. Montgomery County's been winning lately. We have a U.S. Senator, we have the State Treasurer, we have the Comptroller, we have the Attorney General. And I think part of it was that Baltimore wanted to get back in the race. And in the past, there used to be a geographic breakdown for our officers, not all male like the Republican one. Besides male and female, it had to do with geographic areas. The chair and the vice chair of our party are now from Baltimore City. So I think that might be more of it. And Baltimore is more liberal, but I think that they're showing, and watch what's coming out of Baltimore City. They don't like having the spotlight taken off of them.
Well, before we're able to examine Susan's thesis of whether it's regionalism versus ideology for the Democrats, Bill, Lieutenant Governor Boyd Rutherford, a former panelist here on 21 this week, has hired a new press secretary. Is he going to be running to hold on to the governor's mansion in 22?
Yeah, I mean, it's natural that he would be. I mean, I know Boyd. I worked with Boyd when I was in the Ehrlich administration. He's very capable. Some people may mistake his quiet demeanor as sort of, non-political, below the radar. He's a very keen strategist. I think he's a strong candidate. He's a moderate African-American. I'd call him a centrist. But he's a good candidate. And I think a lot of Democrats are overlooking him and seizing this moment as if he's weak, and he's not.
Let me just say, I agree with you. I worked with him. He was secretary when I was a chairman of a committee down there. I think he is a centrist. I think he wants to work hard. So I agree with you. I think he's a good candidate for the Republicans.
When he came in, I remember having a conversation with him he said, Susan, we're a team. I don't have a staff and he doesn't have a staff. We have a staff. And he says it's so much better to get a collective message out. If I were to see Boyd right now, I think I'd ask, what's happening to the collective message that communicates better with one person?
I have to tell you, Casey, he's everywhere. He's in all parts of the state. Yep. You talk about East, West, Prince George's County. He's everywhere. He's marched in more parades.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
so let's take this hypothesis a little further. Then, if Susan is incorrect in that, which is what I think the progressives are seizing the party apparatus and are going to push.
But part of it has to do with Baltimore, where jealous is known.
Which I think you're going to push for another progressive candidate to run for governor. I think you're looking at losing 3 elections in a row.
I don't know. I mean, historically, the lieutenant governor doesn't fare well when they run for governor. Now, I don't know. Maybe he will break the mold. I think it's to be determined, and I think we can hold off till January to see how things start.
Well, you're carrying the same issues. If Boyd's going to be, riding transportation, riding education, which is going to be the largest, with the legacy of Hogan,
report.
It's going to be the largest funding of education in the history of Maryland, new construction.
Well, and that's because of the vote that we took regarding casino money.
But Boyd is going to have this large S, including Maryland's fiscal shape, I understand is
assuming it passes, but that's another
okay.
story.
Yeah, I agree.
Well,
but
we got one more issue to think about, And that's the potential change in the congressional delegations, because the Supreme Court issued an opinion stating that the gerrymandered 6th district is not constitutionally viable as it is currently drawn. And so they're going to have to draw a new 6th district sometime between now and 2020. So, Mark, John, how's the General Assembly going to deal with gerrymandering as opposed to
right.
gerrymandering?
So let's
Here he
do a
goes.
quick education on redistricting, which I know more than I want to know about. First of all, the governor proposes a plan. Larry-mandering, if you want
From
to call
his
it.
commission.
That's fine. That's fine. He's talking about having a commission do it. That's fine. The Constitution says the governor proposes a plan. Then the two houses, the House and the Senate, the two chambers, they get to propose their own plan. Now, if Mike Miller and Mike Bush can't get their act together and come up with a Democratic plan to overrule the governor's plan, then they're stupid. That's all I can say.
But there's an interesting wrinkle in this that adds an additional complication, which is that whatever plan has to go back to the court. So if we're coining a phrase, Mike mandering, if there's Mike mandering, there's a question as to how far you want to go in a political direction before the courts say, no, that's not acceptable. We'll do something
but
else.
the caveat is the Supreme Court in all of this
just
too,
hold on,
because
just hold on for 2 seconds. That whole thing with the 6th congressional district has to take place this year.
Right.
It has to happen before March. So that's a completely different deal. And I think the court's going to end up drawing that district. I don't think the
But wait a
legislature is
minute,
going
it
to be able to
depends on
fix
what
that.
the Supreme Court says. So the state now has put aside everything till July 1st or when the Supreme Court rules.
Correct.
So,
And the point you make is a really good one, Susan. If the Supreme Court decides to take it up
they have.
because of Brian Frosch's appeal, then that is a big deal. And if they support the lower court's position that this was political gerrymandering, that's a huge deal for the country.
Exactly.
And they're going to have their hands full with challenges across the country.
Well, so let's just say that a reconstituted 6th district is drawn up.
Yeah.
So, Mark, is rich guy David Trone, who replaced rich guy Chris Delaney,
John
Delaney, excuse me, going to be a one-term congressman?
A lot obviously depends on the lines. You can draw the lines into very conservative Carroll County, parts of Baltimore, northern Frederick, and move out of Montgomery County. That frankly tilts the position of that district in a considerable direction. The question is this poker game, if you will, between all the various participants as to how much they're going to push
All
on
right,
that.
well, we got to keep moving on, because there's really an important topic to talk about, and that's transportation. And according to the latest study by INREX, a global leader for transportation analytics, the Washington region has the 6th worst traffic congestion in the country. Governor Hogan has proposed widening the Capital Beltway, which was supported by all 6 of the members of the county council, as a means of solving the problem. But John, we got a fly in the ointment. Montgomery County Delegate Al Carr is suggesting that he's going to introduce legislation to block construction. Why?
I don't know why Delegate Carr is doing this. I don't think it's going to be.
Even Mark Elrich is in support of widening the Beltway.
No, I don't
He
think
said
that.
he said no though when he was sworn in.
Let me just finish. I think Al Carr has got good intentions here. There's a lot of concern about widening the Beltway in this county. I think that's a good thing to do. I don't think legislation is the way to do this, to stop it. I think there's a lot of support for some kind of improvement of traffic in this area, and this may or may not be the right idea, but Al Carr's legislation is not going to change anything.
What? You're dying to break it.
No, I'm not. I mean, we've been living with this issue forever. The 70s, the 80s, the 90s. The traffic. Let's go to mass transit. Let's give incentives. Let's do fast lanes, HOV. It's not going to work. You got to widen the road. People love their cars.
Wait a minute, the purple line is coming.
You mean more roads?
So what?
Listen. Today it was announced that the county executive came out in favor again of widening the belt, of expanding the Beltway, but against expanding 270. Mark, this seems like a non-starter, because all the people that live up in Clarksburg, they live in Germantown, they live in Gaithersburg, they aren't going to be taking mass transit back and forth to their jobs. If you are a repairman, an HVAC repairman, you're not taking mass transit.
It's bus rapid transit.
Oh, who cares? What the hell you call it? It's a failure. It isn't going to work.
Mark Elrich has got to sit down with Google Maps and figure out how long it takes by mass transit to go from Clarksburg to, say, Tyson's Corner.
Right.
It'll add hours per day when you add up the total. It's just not a viable approach.
All right. So we're going to go to a hard break. We've been having a good time. There are a few more topics to cover before we go to parting shots. So stay tuned when we come back from this short break. So welcome back. We had such a great time talking about the topics that we did in the last long segment that we are going to hold predictions till the first show of 2019. But as we close for the year, I'd like to offer a personal reflection to the viewers of this program, because 21 This Week has been on the air for the past 26 years. My predecessors set a standard of spirited but civil political debate. I'm indebted to their efforts, and I do try to live up to the standards that they set. A special thanks, you can hear everybody laughing. I don't believe that. A special thanks to our panelists who come in and sacrifice their time each Friday evening so that the important issues of Montgomery County and the state of Maryland can be heard in the echo chamber of our national media. And finally, a major thanks to the crew of 21 This Week and Montgomery Community Television, who week in and week out produce the most professional, most interesting political talk show on cable. Coming up next on 21 This Week are our panelists with their parting shots. John Hurson.
Okay. Kind of a sad note. We lost a really important political activist in Montgomery County, Keith Haller, to cancer last week. I want to reiterate things that others have already said, which is he was somebody you could always talk to about politics in this county. He knew it well. He was a confidant of former Congressman Mike Barnes, and I think we will all miss him. So I want to say thank you, Keith, for all of your work. And
thank you, John. And now Susan Heltemes in her parting shot.
It's the end of the year when we all get a little bit nostalgic, and it's the time of the year that I think about my Uncle Vess, who passed away, and I hope he's looking over me. But it's also a time when we have to think about how much we have, and it's a privilege to be able to help others. So think about the people around you, the young couple who lives next door and don't have time to get ready for their family trip, or the elderly lady down the street who may be hungry, or the little kids who could use a little friendship and so they don't misbehave after school. But think about those around you. It doesn't necessarily mean money, but this is the time to year to remember others. So be generous of your time and talents. And if you have a little treasure, use that too. Happy New Year and happy holidays to everyone.
Thank you, Susan. Bill Askinazi, your parting shot.
Thank you, Casey. I was blessed to have a very lengthy discussion with Dr. Suzanne Smith, who's the executive director for the Montgomery County Coalition for the Homeless. She's done an incredible job. We've heard from the county executive last year, or over the summer, that we've eradicated the homeless problem for veterans in Montgomery County. She's about to announce that we've eradicated the problem for the homeless, which is, if you think about it, it's incredible. What I would like to encourage everyone, there's a stigma with mental illness in this county, in this world. Mentally ill people are not mentally ill by choice, by circumstance predominantly. If they get the correct medication and the correct resources, they will recover. I encourage everyone to not look through people who are mentally ill, but to actually reach out and help folks who are our family members, our cousins, our brothers and sisters.
Thank you, Bill. And Mark Uncapher,
I'm going to take a leaf from John and try and be more bipartisan and extend the honeymoon that Mark Elridge had. And just to acknowledge yesterday's statement at the breakfast of Committee for Montgomery, talking about the Kirwan Commission and echoing something that Ike Leggett said, which is that the funding for Kirwan commission recommendations should not come at the expense of Montgomery County.
thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time, your effort, and I hope all of you have a wonderful holiday season and a great end of 2018 and the start of a wonderful 2019. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.